Hi, everyone. This is Chrissy Faltruso. I'm the Vice President of Customer Success at Client Success. We are a customer success management solution helping companies operationalize their customer success programs. For today's session, I'm going to cover the 5 playbooks every CS team should develop. Having done this several times at different companies, I can safely say that having playbooks as a framework really helps operationalize and scale your team's process to ensure everyone is doing the right things at the right time. So let's jump right in. The first thing I want to cover today is just what is a playbook. I'm sure at different organizations, it can mean different things. In fact, if you're in sports, it can mean something entirely different. So the way that I think about a playbook is that it's a series of actions that are meant to be executed to really help a customer achieve a goal or objective in a scalable manner, right? So think about this as, if you, almost like a recipe, right, is a great analogy for a playbook, right? You have this outcome or this meal or this thing that you want to cook or bake or whatever it is. And there's not only the ingredients, but there's the steps that you have to take to make that a reality. And so that's your playbook, right? It's your actions. It's all the things that you're going to do to make that outcome. And so really playbooks help teams in a bunch of different ways. One, it can help your organization have visibility into what tasks and activities your customers are doing. It provides a consistent engagement for customers at different points in your customer journey. And it really makes sure that you can assess whether or not your customers are achieving the right things at the right time, right? So if your playbook is focused on a specific milestone or task that you need your customer to achieve, a playbook's a great way to measure and manage that that's actually happening. So let's dig in. There's 5 main components to what make up an effective playbook. The first is you need a clearly defined success outcome or goal, right? So every playbook or anything that you're working on, right? Even a strategy, a broad strategy, it needs to have a specific goal in mind, right? You're having your team work on this to achieve some specific outcome. If we're using the example of a renewal playbook, for example, the goal here is that you've orchestrated the entire renewal process in hopes that you're successful in executing that renewal, right? Having that customer subscribe again in that process. So you got to make sure that that goal is crystal clear, both internally as well as your customers, right? Setting those expectations and making sure that you're both aligned is key. The second is understanding the criteria on who you're going to target, when, and why, right? So every playbook, you can have so many, honestly. I mean, we're going to hone in on 5 today, but I've created up to 72 at some companies and really over-engineered it. But there's very specific criteria that you'll take into consideration, right? So perhaps it's the timing of something. So think about a survey, for example. Maybe you have a survey that's deployed, and once it's deployed is the time. And maybe the actions thereafter are that your team is following up with that customer after you've received their feedback, right? So now you kind of know the who and the when, and the why is to really understand the sentiment there and dig a bit deeper. So that criteria is really important because it's also going to help really trigger that playbook if you're using a technology to power those. The third one here is a list of predetermined steps and activities, right? So if I go back to my example of your playbook being your recipe, these steps and activities are the things that you do, right? Where it's going to tell you preheat the oven to 350, right? Butter the pan, saute the peppers, whatever it is that you're doing. And so that list of predetermined steps and activities is usually structured in such a way that they're sequential, right? You're going to do this before you do that. And it's really, it's that helpful prescription that makes the playbook really powerful. Now, I've seen some leaders who will go really deep on creating every single step and task and activity that needs to be executed against. And I've seen others that'll give more broad direction. And the idea there is that it creates more flexibility and creative freedom and liberty for the customer success professional who's executing it. There is no wrong or right way, but you do want to just be clear in setting those expectations and standards with your team. The fourth component here is required assets. So it's not uncommon that, let's say, you're using this to orchestrate your onboarding program. If that's the case, you might have a project plan that you're using. There may be some email templates that really help your team move quickly. There could be some templates or a deck even that you're including. Whatever the case may be, if there are assets, you want to append those assets so that your team has easy access to them as they're navigating through those tasks and activities. So it's really a great way to just make sure that everyone has what they need to be successful. Personally, for me, listen, I like to take all the guesswork out of it. I really hate my team doing administrative busy work where I can prevent it, especially if it's redundant. And so I'm always happy to craft email templates and provide deck templates for them and, other assets, because it's going to help them move faster and spend more of their time where they should, which is consulting with my customers. So those assets, while not required, are really helpful. And again, if these are redundant playbooks or tasks and activities, it really helps reduce the time that your team is spending on busy work. And the fifth thing you want is a way to track it. Not only track whether or not it was done, but where you are in that process, if it's not been completed, right? The impact of it. So tracking is really key here. In fact, it's not even just tracking the execution of the playbook and all those tasks and activities, but also the later impact of that, right? Usually if you've got that playbook, we talked about this is point one, is that you've got a defined success outcome or goal. And so not only do you want to track it, but you want to be able to measure that effectiveness. And so being able to get that visibility will help you connect all those dots. So there you have it, right? So you know what a playbook is now. You know what's required to build out that playbook. Now we're going to dig into what those top 5 playbooks should be. Now, I'm not going to give you my play-by-play here. I'm going to give you a snapshot of each of these playbooks. And if you'd like to see examples of my playbooks, I'm happy to share that with you. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. But let's start with the first playbook. I'm a big advocate of making sure that I'm clear on our customer journey and what those repeatable milestones will be that are agnostic of customer segment or type or journey, right? Like, every single customer will go through a couple things with us. And those are the things I really want to hone in on when I create playbooks. So when I think about the first one here, it's your partnership kickoff. These are going to be tied to the tasks and activities you're going to orchestrate with your customer day one. In fact, if you're a customer success organization or any business organization that is involved, maybe even in the pre-sales process, maybe it starts before day one. And so think about this. Your partnership kickoff playbook can include things like, your knowledge transfer from sales to CS. It could have, details around the email that goes from your sales team introducing the customer success team. It might have and facilitate things like a new customer survey or assets and collateral that you'll need to collect. It could have the kickoff, that meeting that you're going to want to orchestrate and all the different points that you're going to have to touch that customer within that period of time. So again, this is where I talk about the depth and breadth of a playbook, right? You can really go deep and outline every single task and activity if it's needed and necessary. Otherwise, you can keep it high level, and this could be triggered just to remind the team, this has to be done. Here are some of those key stages in this part of the journey or that are aligned with this playbook, and here's what we need you to do. So whatever the case is, like I said, this is just a really great one. You always want to make sure that you're kicking off the partnership the best way possible, right? I'm sure all of you have heard you only have one chance to make a first impression, and this is that, right? Think about the first time your customer's interacting with your customer success organization or your sales engineering team or your onboarding team or who's ever involved in that initial engagement with your customer. Orchestrating this and getting it right is really critical to the success of the long-term partnership. So for me, that's my number one playbook. And not just because it's the first one in the journey, but because I think it has the most impact. During this time, I'll also make sure that I'm not only aligning with our customers, but we're focusing in on their goals, what they're hoping to achieve, and what success will look like at the duration of our partnership. So again, you can use this to orchestrate as much detail or as little, but again, this is going to be my number one, is orchestrating the beginning stages of your customer engagement. The second playbook is your onboarding playbook. Now, every organization is going to onboard customers very differently. If you've got a very complex technical product, onboarding can last a year or beyond. If you've got a more simple product, right, onboarding could be a couple weeks. It could be a couple days. Maybe it's a couple hours even. So onboarding really does depend on your product, on your customer, on their level of engagement, right? Maybe on the size of their business, the level of technical aptitude that's required, how many integrations. So there's a lot to consider when you think about onboarding. But you do want to make sure that that stage is really, really clear both to your team and your customer with regards to what you need to do. Because if any of you have read even like Donna Weber's book on onboarding, there's a lot of focus on this because it's such a critical stage, right? Failure to launch or failure to get your customers onboarded into the partnership effectively could have long-term impact on the success of the partnership. So the reason I make playbook number 2 onboarding is because of the critical impact and the nature of that engagement. Now, again, I didn't include a sample of my onboarding playbook because my onboarding playbook is going to look very different than yours, right? Mine is specific to my customers and our product and our team and how we're structured and how we engage. And yours should look and feel very different. But what you do want to make sure that you're including, again, is the different milestones or tasks and activities at a higher level that you know that no matter what happens to that customer or any of your customers during onboarding, these things will need to happen in order for that to be effective. So for us, we focus really heavily on data integration, right? It's almost the first few steps are almost exclusively focused on that because without pulling data effectively from all of your tools and systems into our product, you can't leverage the technology effectively, right? It's like, garbage in, garbage out. You got to make sure you have good, clean data coming into the solution in a meaningful way, make sure it's the right data. And that way you can start to leverage the product because it's going to ingest all of that and really start to build the operations around that input. So for us, it's all about the data. Now, for other folks, maybe the data is actually just humans manually inputting information, right? It's the adoption and use of the solution that doesn't require any data flow. It's just your team using it. And so maybe onboarding for you is training your customer on the top 5 things that they can do that's going to drive that product engagement, thus resulting on them effectively adopting it. And so again, that's why it's got to be unique. It's got to be a bit different, but making sure that your team is clear on what you want them to do and how you expect them to do it and when and with whom. So my playbook number 2, strong recommendation, onboarding. So let's talk through playbook number 3. This is common, right? You'll hear a lot of companies talk about a business review through the lens of a QBR, which would be a quarterly business review. Maybe you've heard the term EBR, which is an executive business review. My team, we don't use either of those. We use what we call a core meeting, which is our customer objective review meeting, meaning we want to review our customers' objectives. But either way, they all have the same principle, right? Is that we want to align strategically with our customers' executives and talk about the progress we've made together and how we're advancing towards their goals. So regardless of what you call it, playbook number 3 is all about that business review. Now, think about the level of importance of a business review in any given relationship, right? It's going to help you elevate the conversation and be more strategic and consultative to your customer. It's going to likely get you access to different stakeholders whom you may not have had the advantage of connecting with previously. And it's going to help you level set the value delivery with your customers and have that acknowledged. Now, we all know that if your customers aren't seeing value from your product and your solution and the partnership, there's a low likelihood that they're going to continue to renew that subscription. And if you're in a subscription model, this is going to be really important. So these business reviews, whether you run them monthly, quarterly, biannually, annually, it doesn't matter, right? It's about orchestrating the right tasks and activities. They're going to help you and your team prepare to have a very, very impactful conversation. So for my team, when we have our business review or our core meeting playbook, we focus on everything here. Because this is so critical, I outline the outreach email in which they have a template for that, when that email should be going out, to whom it should be going out, the logistical coordination of this, right? We make sure that the invite goes out. It's got the clear agenda, that we've got, clear Zoom meetings included, all of the proper attendees. I make sure that our playbook outlines, here's a sample of the deck. It gives them all the data places that they're going to need to go to access that information to effectively build out this presentation. It walks through steps that says, hey, go align with your main point of contact and make sure that story that we're about to share resonates with them. And then more importantly, we're going to go and execute and orchestrate that conversation and make sure that we've got all those tasks and activities as part of our follow-up. So our core meeting playbook has a whole bunch of steps because we outline every single task and activity, whether it is customer facing or internal, to make sure that this is effectively executed. Given the level of importance here, I believe that that's required. Some organizations, again, maybe you're going to scale back and say, reach out to the customer, book the meeting, build the deck, send the follow-up, right? It could be as little as 4 steps. But in terms of importance and impact of the partnership, my playbook number 3 recommendation, have one for your business review process. Now, playbook number 4 is poor health score. Now, let me rephrase this a little bit. So if you're really starting just to build out your playbook strategy, you might not have a playbook for every single risk factor that could occur. And when I think about this, right, it could be a poor survey response. It could be, so if we're being specific, poor NPS, poor CSAT, poor some other survey where you got a bad score. It could be M&A. It could be executive turnover, right? I can sit here and rattle off probably 20 different playbooks that you might deploy in an at-risk situation with your customer. Now, that said, if I've got to only pick 5 rather, I really wanted to make sure that there was one that addressed risk. So again, for simplicity's sake, I'm going to hone in on the health score. Now, again, if you're building out or have built out your team, you probably have some structure around how you're measuring health of a customer. And maybe you're looking at things like adoption, usage, integrations, it could be engagement, it could be sentiment. There are a whole bunch of different, I think, pieces of criteria that you can look to analyze when you're thinking about the health of your customers. Now, why I include that here is because this is the best time for your team to intervene, right? If your health score is created such that early enough in the partnership that your customer is not behaving the way that they should, where they are in the journey, and given how they've decided that they're going to use your technology, then you need to make sure that this playbook is triggered at the right time to help your team intervene. The worst thing you can do, and the worst thing I've seen so many companies do, is not leverage the health score to drive action and intervention, right? A lot of folks will use it and just sit on that data and it's like, well, we've got 20 red accounts and, we're just not going to do anything about it, right? They're red now. It's a little too late. If you've created and crafted your health score so far up the journey where you're actually being able to measure this on leading indicators, not lagging indicators, this playbook will help your team get ahead of real risk, right? This is like early onset stages where things might not be looking great, but we're hopeful, right? And if we intervene at this time and talk to the right people and turn things around, we can right this ship. And so that's why playbook number 4 is all about intervention around your customer health score. Now, last but definitely not least is playbook number 5, your renewal, right? A lot of us, again, are in a subscription model. And if that is not just easy recurring revenue, or if you're not in a nice 5-year, multi-year contract, or in an on-prem perpetual license model, the renewal is going to be key. And so for us, we orchestrate a very well-crafted and designed playbook for the renewal process because, one, it's all about the timing, making sure that we are starting that renewal process well in advance, and then making sure that my team knows all the tasks and activities to run until that renewal is effectively closed. And that means, unfortunately, sometimes it's closed lost. More often than not, we're hoping to see a closed won renewal. So your renewal playbook is critical especially in that subscription model. Now, like I said, some renewals, depending on who your customers are, can be way more complex and require a lot more time. For example, in my previous roles, I've actually had to manage renewals, but for large enterprise organizations, right? Think of brands like GE. Can you imagine what the procurement and legal review is trying to get a contract through at GE? Well, I'll tell you, 120 days definitely isn't going to cut it. So we used to have to start our renewals 6 months before, after having already mapped out the who, what, when, where, and why of their procurement, legal process, and contract review team. So all of that prep had to be done even in advance of 6 months. And 6 months is when we started talking through the paperwork. Now, fortunately, working with GE, we were in a multi-year. So even though it was 6 months of renewal execution, we did have a couple years on the contract, which was helpful. But you can see how that will change your process and thus your playbook. So again, why I didn't put all my playbooks out here wasn't because I'm not willing and able and eager to share, but because it's so nuanced to your business and your process. But what I will say here is that there are some key elements about the renewal management process that you should really hone in on. One is, when do you want that start date, or when do you need that start date of that process? I gave the example of having worked with large enterprise organizations, which required a lot of lead time. I've also worked for other companies where their auto renew clause in the contract was enough. And if your customer sent you an email and said, you know what, we're good for another year, guess what? That was enough to book the renewal out. And so the process obviously required a lot less effort and a lot less time. So you've got to be thoughtful about when you need to start this and then with whom. The next part of this is making sure that your team is clear on who they should be working on the renewal with. In some cases, it's not always obvious. And so you'll have some conversations with your customers to figure out who the right people are. Again, who are the decision makers, who's influencing this, who's, signing off on it, whose budget does it come out of, right? So a lot of things that you need to align on to make sure that that's well executed. So that's, a bit of what's going to be built into the renewal. And then, of course, you've got the execution of things, right? You've got to prepare the paperwork, the subscription. You got to get things, reviewed maybe internally on your end. Then you got to get things through DocuSign. You got to wait for execution, and they got to book it out. So those are all just examples of different steps in someone's different process. But having that all outlined, especially if you think about scaling your team, it'll always make sure that your team is, again, doing the right things at the right time. And that's really what the playbooks help do, right? It helps us never forget the important things that we've got to do regardless of our customers, who they are, what segment they're in, who, the CSM that's managing it. Time and time again, these are the repeatable processes that you'll want your team to just execute against flawlessly. So again, if you've only got to build a couple, here are my 5, ending with playbook 5, which is the renewal. Now, I know that we've got a couple minutes left, so I will open it up to any Q&A. And so I knew there's a chat window over to the side here. And so if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to field those. Also happy to review any of the 5 playbooks again. And as I mentioned, if you're interested in seeing the 5 playbooks that I've built out, I'm always happy to share that. So please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and happy to pass that information along. But like I mentioned, happy to open up to Q&A. All right. So, Mark, so I see your question here. So you missed a portion of Playbook 1. Can you clarify the difference between a partnership kickoff and onboarding? Absolutely, Mark. So this is something that I put out some documentation on it. I have a pretty opinionated view on the partnership kickoff. A lot of organizations will jump right from the sales process into onboarding, right? You get very tactical, and it's all about getting the platform configured, getting everything ingested, getting the team trained, and then getting them out of onboarding. I do feel like there's a huge opportunity to really spend some time, not a lot of time, but time with your executive stakeholders out the gate. So before you even start onboarding, orchestrating this partnership kickoff, which facilitates a really fantastic executive conversation. You can go ping any one of the CSMs that have ever reported to me where we've used this process. But what we focus on in the partnership kickoff is, 1, getting access to an executive stakeholder as well as the key players in the partnership. We align on our customers' goals. We set expectations. We make sure that we map out what the entire journey is going to look like. We talk through the onboarding process. Like I said, expectations. We talk through our survey journey. We introduce the team with everyone's clear roles and responsibilities. We go through their organization and map things out with them. So a lot of companies probably aren't having this type of meeting before onboarding. But I will tell you is that through the orchestration of that meeting, we've actually transformed how we engage with our customers and the ongoing engagement from onboarding and beyond. And so we have just found that, again, this is just a critical step in our journey. And if you are interested, there is actually a blog post that I published on the Client Success website about transitioning to the partnership kickoff from the onboarding. So if you are interested, go check that out. Krista Roberts, who is my little hype girl in the chat right now, she's one of the senior CSMs on my team. She just gave you some feedback on their mark as well. But definitely go check out that blog post that I have there. It'll give you more context. And I've also shared the deck that we use for that meeting and a whole framework on how to orchestrate it. All right, Tracy has a question regarding what will it take to initiate a multi-year contract as part of a renewal playbook conversation? I mean, honestly, Tracy, it's a great question, and we are really heavily focused on orchestrating more multi-year contracts. I think it's just part of how you're teeing up the discussion. What I found is that if your subscription model doesn't naturally already have multi-year built in. So if your first year was a 12-month, it is hard to move from 12 to 24 or from 24 to 36 or beyond. What we do is we try to find some incentive. And so what my team has are different levers that they can pull, whether it's, pricing concessions, additional product, or, something else that we're willing to do to make it mutually beneficial. We have found that having those levers, which are built into some of the steps in the conversations we're having, that's helped us get through and get to a multi-year contract. So I think it's just about making sure that you do have it there as something that your team is checking off. And so maybe it's not a step in the playbook. Maybe you build a document that says, like, here are the things that we need to discuss with the customer when we're having that renewal conversation. And you create for them a little checklist, right? And it's like, introduce a multi-year as part of that. And, then they have like the little sub bullets there for other like little levers that they can introduce to facilitate that multi-year. So I think there's ways that you can get creative there, Tracy, and I'm happy to do, private conversation with you and talk about that. Now, I see that we've got a couple minutes left, and hopefully, Tracy, that answered your question. But I do see that we have a couple minutes left here. If there's any additional questions from anyone, you just drop them into the chat. I'm happy to answer. Otherwise, if there are none, if anyone else has questions, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, and happy to answer any of those privately. Again, happy to share any of the material that I've built and developed. We're really big on that, so definitely just hit me up. Otherwise, it was really a pleasure being a part of Empower today, and I hope everyone enjoyed the session.